I'm so sorry. I hope that audio was fine. Right. If you miss those matches, you can always catch up on our social media platforms, be that Facebook or YouTube. To get the afternoon edition started, we invite Team Teaching Service, the proponent of the MOOT, to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Cameron, first speaker.
Good afternoon, Kevin Grant.
And Rashid Nelson.
Thank you, Team Teaching Service, and we now invite the Ministry of Tourism to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shakina Morgan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Blake.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Davita Keane.
Thank you so much, teams. And I'm just observing that they're all clad in black. Yeah? Is that a coincidence? Or, we're putting reparations behind us or in front of us? At this point, I invite the judges who are also dressed in black, barring Kenisha. So this is quite interesting today, to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. The name is Javon Downey, and I'll be serving as the chair adjudicator for this match.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kenisha Nelson, and I am one of your wing adjudicators for this match.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lacardiga Nelson, and I also serve as a wing adjudicator.
Thank you so much, Team Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, Jade. And at this point, I will now hand over to the chair adjudicator. Good luck, teams, and we will stay tuned to the arguments. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Aninki. So teams, you are already familiar with the rules at this stage, but just to quickly reiterate, you are allotted 7, 6, and 5 minutes respectively, which entails protected time, which will be indicated by the ding of a bell when you're exiting your first minute, and ding of a bell when you have re-entered protected time. When you have allotted your time, the bell will ding twice, after which you're allotted a further 15 seconds to wrap up, and then the bell will ding continuously to signal that you're out of time and you are to yield the floor. We'll have 2 periods of cross-examinations, and we will explain further when we get there. So without further ado, let's get the match started with the first speaker on side proposition. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of this House, there are wounds that time does not heal, only truth can. Slavery and colonialism were not only crimes of brutality, but denial. Lives were not stolen, but silenced. For generations, millions of Africans and their descendants were treated not as people, but as property, bought, sold, and erased from history. And even today, the echoes of those atrocities are felt in our institutions, our culture, and our relationships. So today, we not merely stand to debate dollars and cents, we stand to answer a deeper question: what does justice truly require? I will define the key terms and present 2 main arguments. Reconciliation is not an alternative to justice, it's the highest form of it, and the superiority of reconciliation as opposed to the inadequacies of monetary compensation. To begin this debate meaningfully, let us be clear on our terms so that we're all debating the same motion. Reparation from the origin literally means to repair. In this debate, it refers to all measures taken by former colonial powers to address the enduring harms of slavery and colonialism. These may include financial payments, but more importantly, they encompass symbolic and moral acts like apologies, education reform, truth-telling, and we'll talk about that later on. Slavery refers to transatlantic slave trade in which millions of Africans were forcibly taken, dehumanized, and exploited across the Caribbean and the Americas. Colonialism is a systematic domination of one people by another, as seen in Britain's control over Jamaica and other colonies from the 17th century to the mid-20th century. To prioritize means to place greater importance on one goal over the other, and we argue that reconciliation refers to processes aimed at restoring relationship, acknowledging wrongs, and fostering understanding and healing, and rebuilding trust between victims and the perpetrators or their descendants. This may include apologies, as mentioned before, truth commissions, education reform, institutional reform, cultural memorials, and etc. Finally, monetary compensation refers to direct payments as redress for historical injustice. Mr. Speaker, let us be clear. Our burden is to show that true reparations require restoration of relationships between the two. We will demonstrate that reconciliation is not a check which leads to transformative and long-term justice. The opposition, in contrast, must argue that money before reconciliation without healing and acknowledgement can right the wrongs of history. Now that we have established what this debate is truly about, let us turn to why reconciliation must take priority in any meaningful conversation about reparations. When we speak of reparations, we often rush to think of money, but justice is not a transaction, it's a transformation. And that transformation begins not with a check, but with the truth. Not with a payout, but with reconciliation. Reparation at heart must aim to restore not just stolen wealth, but stolen humanity. Enslaved Africans were not only exploited for their labor, they were brutalized, dehumanized, and told for generations that their suffering was natural, even a divinely ordained. Colonialism did not take land, it rewrote identity, uprooted culture, and instilled inferiority. As Hilary Beckles, chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, said, slavery was not just an economic crime, it was a crime against humanity, culture, and history. And that is why any serious attempt at reparative justice must begin to confront the full truth of what was done, not just economically, but spiritually, psychologically, and culturally. With this shared reckoning, monetary compensation risks being delivered in a vacuum where pain is still denied, history is still contested, and healing has not begun. And this is why this government contends that reconciliation must take precedence over monetary compensation. Monetary compensation without reconciliation often leads to confusion, resentment, and political backlash. Who receives the money? On what basis? How is justice measured? Without the shared public understanding of history, these questions deepen division. Reconciliation, by contrast, begins with truth-telling, acknowledgement, and education. It builds the moral and social foundation that allows compensation, if and when it comes, to be understood, accepted, and effective. Take the case of post-genocide Rwanda. After one of the most brutal ethnic conflicts of the 20th century, the country did not turn to compensation. It turned to community-based reconciliation. Through the Gakaka courts, survivors and perpetrators came face to face. Justice was not perfect, but the process promoted truth-telling, accountability, and healing. Over 12,000 of these courts operated between 2002 and 2012, allowing for more than 1 million cases to be tried. The National Unity and Reconciliation Commission reported over 80% of Rwandans believe reconciliation was achieved in their community. This outcome was not just peace, it was social reintegration, stability, and long-term national growth. Now contrast this with the great United States of America, which invests billions in programs aimed at addressing racial inequality, from affirmative action to housing grants to diversity initiatives. And yet the country has never formally apologized for slavery, never publicly addressed the generational trauma it caused, never created a shared historical memory. Confederate states still stand, school curricula remains contested, and racial divisions persist. Despite decades of monetary initiatives, a 2021 Pew study showed that only 76% of blacks believe that America has not acknowledged the legacy of slavery. This is not a funding issue, it's a moral and psychological deficit. When a nation skips reconciliation, money feels like a bribe to forget, not an act to repair. No wonder America is the way it is even today. The opposition may argue that monetary compensation is urgent and overdue. We agree, it has its role, but urgency must not be allowed to trample the process. We see this, for example, Mr. Speaker, Lloyd's of London, a firm that once insured, is now taking an active role in researching its transatlantic slave trade, not to protect its brand, but to seek restorative justice. It partnered with Johns Hopkins University to assess the extent to which profits from slavery was developed direct support descendants of those harmed. This is reconciliation. It is not afraid of the truth, it is driven by it. The CARICOM 10-point plan reflects this priority, where the demand for is not dollar, but a formal and public apology as the first step towards reparation. Mr. Speaker, when we think about the fundamental historical oppression and exploitation are not just about wealth, but about the rupture of social and the moral fabric of society. Without reconciliation, we risk merely covering up those scars of the past with money, while deeper wounds still remain untreated. South Africa is a prime example of this. it was only after reconciliation that the country came together and started to live as one. Kevin will speak some more as to the superiority of reconciliation over monetary compensation, while Rasheen will tie things up and close the debate for us. Thank you.
All right, so we thank the first proposition speaker for a spirited opening to this debate, and we invite the first opposition speaker to do likewise. Hear, hear.
Good afternoon, honorable adjudicators, esteemed opponents, and members of the audience. I stand before you as the first speaker for team opposition today, firmly rejecting the MOOT, which reads, be it resolved that reparations for slavery and colonialism should prioritize reconciliation over monetary compensation. The proposition rather brought some arguments today, which may seem spirited and somewhat factual. However, judges, when we want to look at the fact that when they mention Rwanda, the Rwanda post-genocide policy of national unity and reconciliation has failed to adequately address Tutsi-Hutu's animosity, thus leaving the country vulnerable to further socio-ethnic violence and complicating U.S. relations in East Africa. Also, the proposition mentioned that reconciliation is the highest form of justice. But we can also look at the fact that is reconciliation the highest form of justice? What is reconciliation? What is reparations, rather, without monetary compensation? Mr. Speaker, the proposition team is asking us to accept a symbolic healing rather than tangible justice. Nonsense. We believe that reconciliation without material redress is just not enough, not accepted. And to not mention risk, if I may say so. We refuse to stand as the opposition team for the whitewashing of our history and much prefer to confront the consequences of slavery and colonialism. Monetary compensation, Mr. Speaker, must be at the core, and I repeat, must be at the core of any meaningful reparative effort. The historical injustices we faced as a people were not only moral and cultural violations, they were economic. Systems built on exploitation with deep-rooted impacts and consequences that have contributed to the global inequality that we face today, not accepted at this time. Reparations must not begin with words, Mr. Speaker, but with action. Reparations must not begin with apologies, Mr. Speaker, but with investment. Monetary compensation is logical, practical, and beneficial. Before I delve into the outline of our arguments today, I would first like to define the term monetary compensation, as I note that the propositions team was a little lacking there. So what we have for our definition of monetary compensation today is direct financial payment or material restitution given to individuals, families, or communities as a form of justice. The Caribbean bears a complex history, marked by slavery and colonialism. Jamaica, a former British colony, gained independence in 1962, but till today still grapples with economic disparities and development challenges as a result of our colonial past. Jamaica's nominal GDP in 2024 was approximately 20.6 billion, not accepted, 20.6 billion US dollars, while our colonizers, Spain and the UK, stood at 1.799 trillion and 3.839 trillion US dollars respectively. Mr. Speaker, according to the Bratty report, Jamaica is owed 7.6 trillion pounds from Britain and 120 billion pounds from Spain in reparations. With that said, Jamaica attempted to begin the process of seeking reparations through the passing of a resolution, and then subsequently there was the establishment of the Jamaica Reparations Commission in 2011. And in 2013, we joined CARICOM's regional initiative seeking reparations, not accepted, seeking reparatory justice through a 10-step plan, an initiative that sadly has not really come to pass.
On that point?
Not accepted. Now for the meat of the matter, my first argument. Slavery and colonialism were economic in nature. Therefore, reparations must prioritize an economic solution. Both were fundamentally designed as economic systems with the aim of not accepted. With the aim of exploiting labor and extracting resources from the Caribbean. The core damage caused being economic, and as such, the prioritization of monetary compensation is key to addressing the financial losses and disparities. Slavery was commercial, and it enriched our colonizers at the expense of our ancestors. As a point supported by Walter Rodney, who notes, the enslavement of Africans was not primarily for racist reasons, as a lot of persons may believe, but because of the economic exploitation. While the reasoning behind not accepted, while the reasoning behind colonialism differed from slavery, it still led to the massive extraction of wealth from the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, because of the economic nature of slavery and colonialism, our ancestors' freedom, also not accepted, also came at a price. After Haiti declared their independence in 1804, in 1825, under military threat, they made an agreement to pay 150 million francs, which was later reduced to 90 million francs, to compensate French slave owners for the loss of property. Additionally, the UK, under the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, paid 20 million pounds, which is now 17 billion today, beginning in 1835 and ending just in 2015, which was right around the corner, not accepted, to slave owners as compensation for the loss of their property. Why then, Mr. Speaker, is it not justified that our colonizers pay us what is owed to our ancestors? The UK went above and beyond to secure loans from bankers such as Nathan Rothschild, Mr. Speaker, to pay. So what is another loan to the UK to pay us what is owed to our ancestors? The admission of the economic value of slavery and colonialism were not ignored, and that is what resulted in Haiti paying French slave owners as well as the UK paying British slave owners after slavery ended. But still today, the Caribbean remains uncompensated for our losses, not accepted. While we're still suffering from the long-term effects of this economic exploitation, the losses and impacts that have sadly defined us and limited us as a nation. Mr. Speaker, we're a small island developing state with poorly diversified and highly dependent economies as a result of our monoculture economies, created during slavery and maintained under colonization. Additionally, there are major gaps in our infrastructural needs, as what we inherited from our colonizers was infrastructure for the sole purpose of extraction, not accepted, of our wealth, and not to connect and develop our communities or to make us better. They developed ports, roads, and railways, some may think, but it was only for the process of not accepted to make exploitation easier. Now, I don't like the proposition team to look at the fact that slavery and colonialism were fundamentally economic processes that milked the Caribbean dry, and as such, reparations must prioritize monetary compensation. My second point, Mr. Speaker, an admission of guilt is not necessary for compensation. Team proposition reparations can be facilitated without an explicit admission of guilt. What I mean by this is that accountability can exist without a formal admission of wrongdoing, which in this case might never come due to legal and political factors. The United Nations basic principles and guidelines on the right to remedy and reparations outline the various forms of reparations, including compensation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. According to these same principles, while apologies can be a part of the process, they should not hinder that monetary compensation can still be granted, and they are not required for monetary compensation. Despite the CARICOM Reparations Commission 10-point plan, beginning with a formal apology, it also emphasizes that reconciliation is not necessary for monetary compensation. My second speaker will then go into a policy that we have to lay out how we will receive this reparation money through monetary compensation and how we will use it to make the development of our country greater. Thank you.
All right, thank you, teams. Remember, there's a period of cross-examination. Yeah, remember, there's a period of cross-examination, teams. I see we are eager to get the debate rolling. Right. So now we will enter into that first period of cross-examination where we'll allow opposition to pose 3 questions to proposition, questions capped at 10 seconds and responses limited to 30 seconds, and we'll flip the arrangements to afford proposition the same privilege. Team opposition.
Team proposition mentioned South Africa's success. In what way would you consider reconciliation in South Africa's success, given the fact that Afrikaners are fleeing discrimination and racially based violence in 2025?
All right, so first of all, Africans are not fleeing racial discrimination. The big issue that is why most Africans are, those that do actually flee are fleeing, is for economic reasons. And so the data has suggested that the majority of South Africans actually do think that the government has successfully trampled down apartheid philosophy, and so they are socially okay. It is a matter of economic reasons why Africans mostly leave. So in other words, they have fixed the discrimination issue.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, second question.
If you claim that they are still leaving for economic reasons, would that not showcase the fact that reconciliation did not fix all the problems, because there is a wealth gap that still exists among the minority and the majority, which was also an issue?
So first of all, the flaw in the argument is that we are debating the priority. The priority ought to be reconciliation. That we argue they are fixed. Despite the economic situation, compared to Greece that has received monetary compensation, South Africa is trampling the Grecian economy. South African economy is 32nd largest economy in the world, whereas Greece, that received the economic reparation that you want, is down at 52 and almost went bankrupt. So if the monetary thing was going to fix the problem, then why did Greece have to run to the IMF and rely on so many other people to bail them out of poverty? But South Africa never do that yet.
All right. Final question from side opposition.
To that point, then since there is still an economic gap in South Africa, and still, since the minority which were the victors are still fleeing for racial violence, how would you consider reconciliation successful in South Africa? What would you then use to say it was successful?
First of all, we did not agree that they are fleeing for that. We said they are fleeing for better economic reasons. Even in the great America, people leave America. People leave their teaching jobs all the time in America, even though America is one of the greatest economies in the world. But the point that we are driving home is that overall, Africans think that their country is good and safe to live in, even though white people sit in government. What does that tell you? That tells you that the hard issues that came from apartheid have been fixed to the extent that they are okay with a former Minister of Tourism being a white man.
All right, so we thank opposition for their questions and now entertain questions from team proposition.
Isn't it possible that financial compensation as the priority could come across as a bribe, that is, an attempt to buy off the oppressed without addressing the moral and psychological harm done?
It being a priority does not negate the fact that an apology can come after. It being a priority addresses the issues that face Jamaicans and Caribbean persons today, which is hand-to-mouthism that affects the regular poor black man.
If so be the case, and this was all just purely a business transaction, why would any former colony apologize for something they don't think they did wrong if they can just pay you to shut up about it?
Well, to clarify, it's not a payment to shut up, because the debate is about prioritizing. So we are saying to prioritize monetary compensation, and then the apology can follow. It's not purely a business transaction.
Final question.
All right. How do you justify a payout if the root causes of the suffering, such as psychological trauma, remain unaddressed?
As we have stated, the cruelty experienced in colonization and slavery were a cruel means to an end, an economic end. So again, slavery was first an economic system. As such, the first route should be economic redress.
All right, so we thank both teams for a very fiery and engaging period of cross-examination. The debate now continues as we receive the submission from the second proposition speaker. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition is attempting to divorce from slavery and colonialism race. What? If race was not an issue, then how comes they were comfortable with taking indentured laborers who are not blacks and pay them to come to the Caribbean and work? But when it came to slavery, they needed black people to work. It had every single thing to do with race. Now I want to start again with the second where she ended. She ended by cutely saying, oh, the first part of the CARICOM 10-point plan is asking for an apology. That in and of itself is an argument she presented that supports STEAM proposition, that we must start at the heart of the issue. And then, note, she also cutely said that they have put it at the last. What does that mean? It means that even today, the people who are leading the charge for reparation are clear and know that there is nothing fundamentally to gain from the Europeans giving you money and not actually accepting it, accepting that they did something wrong. And here is why. By their logic, right, the sum of the harms of slavery is simply how much it costs. That is their logic. That is essentially saying that you could somehow quantify the social unrest that exists in colonies that were raped by slavery. They are suggesting that there's a way that you can put a price tag on the lives that were lost. They are suggesting that whatever bleaching issues we claim that are as a result of the impact of slavery now can simply be fixed by paying it off. But we contend instead, Mr. Speaker, and before I talk about that, they also suggested that the bad economy that we are experiencing now, this whole purely economic argument is purely economic. And this is why there's something wrong fundamentally with prioritizing economics. Because their argument suggests that the bad economy Jamaica has nothing to do with corruption of our own people. It has nothing to do with bad fiscal policies from our own government. They are suggesting that the bad economy we have everything to do with slavery and nothing to do with FinSac. Have nothing to do with all of the other bad things that we as a government has done. That is why it is bad to prioritize this monetary compensation view. Now, that leads me perfectly to the first part. The superiority of reconciliation over monetary compensation firstly lies in the fact that it is relational and not transactional. Tevin rightly suggested to you that reparations has to do with repairing and renewing. What is broken is the relationship between blacks and whites, Caribbeans and UK. Even the way we talk about the Privy Council, even the way we talk about Republic, shows that there is still strong hate and hurt having to do with white versus blacks. And that's why reconciliation is the best first step in fixing this. Now, when we talk about South Africa, their TRC, Truth Reconciliation Commission, these are the facts, and she cannot deny it. Even if Rwanda may have some economic problems, the reality is that 80% of Rwandans feel like the social issues have been addressed. That is simple fact. Even if she wants to think that there is some economic struggle, the issue or the reality in South Africa is that only about 10% of persons who were due reparations from apartheid were paid. And yet still, South Africans are content with having white people sitting in their governments. What does that mean? It means that people have learned to move past the hurt and are now able to focus on building their country. That is precisely why South Africa now is a strong part of the BRICS community, which is a strong rival for the UN and the EU. It literally means that even with whatever economic struggles they think exist, they are still one of the strongest economies in the world. Where did it start? It did not start with a monetary payout. It started with them fixing the relational issues associated through reconciliation. Now, reconciliation is also a more comprehensive view to correct the historical event. Take France and Haiti, for example. If you look on it from their perspective, France was right to request gold from Haiti. Why? Because they lost business. But it was flawed because they viewed it from a transactional perspective. Even they, looking at how they impacted Haiti, have concluded that it was bad. But in their world, what you get is a people who will not be willing to cripple their own economies and pay $1.3 trillion that is bigger than even their own budget. No, but in our world, what you will have are two sets of peoples willing to come to the table and have an honest conversation about how each party played their role in it. their side of the world is dishonest because it ignores how blacks played their own role in slavery. But in our side of the world, we are able to have a conversation about the fact that blacks sold blacks to you white people. And so we are able to own up our side of the hurt. They own up their side of the earth. We can come to a conclusion that this is how we fix it by reculturing, re-educating the people. And then I can guarantee you they will be more willing to fund and pay a lot of these re-socialization projects.
Time. So we thank the second proposition speaker and now invite the second opposition speaker to come with his submissions. Here.
The opposition firmly believes that reparations for slavery and colonialism must prioritize monetary compensation over reconciliation. Economic redress for economic harm. I extend warm greetings to the honorable adjudicators, distinguished members of the opposition, team proposition members of the audience. As the second opposing speaker, I stand by the well-established fact that slavery and colonialism were fundamentally economic systems that inflicted significant financial harm, and reparations must address this damage directly. Reconciliation, while important, should not be a substitute for material justice that monetary compensation offers. We've heard the robust arguments presented by my first speaker on the need for economic reparations, and I fully agree. My focus today will be to further underline the practicality and long-term benefits of prioritizing monetary compensation and how this approach even supports lasting reconciliation. Mr. Speaker, before I proceed, I find it prudent to counter some of the arguments raised by the proposition. And they noted that slavery, not accepted, that's because that slavery was race-based, and that's why indentured laborers came in and they paid them. But Mr. Speaker, because slavery was economic in nature, they went to the next best, cheapest labor available after it was abolished. Mr. Speaker, I would like to also remind the proposition that based on research and evidence, the economic losses estimated were $7.6 trillion from the UK and $120 billion from Spain. That's based on research and facts. And Mr. Speaker, and they said that the relationship with Jamaica and the UK is broken, Mr. Speaker. If the relationship is broken, I'll use their example. Why are we okay with an opposition leader who is white at the moment? Why is the British High Commissioner in Jamaica? We disagree with the point that there has been reconciliation. And therefore, I will move on to my first point, Mr. Speaker, that monetary compensation supports lasting reconciliation. Monetary compensation are not mutually exclusive, Mr. Speaker. And that's why this debate is about which should be prioritized. The proposition would like to reduce our arguments to just about financial compensation and money alone, but we're saying it should be prioritized.
1 minute. So, audience, we get that you are engaged and the debate is riveting, but we're asking that you keep it down a bit so that we can thoroughly hear the debaters and follow the debate. You're here? Yes, here. All right, you may continue.
Yes. So in fact, monetary compensation can and should fuel reconciliation efforts by providing the resources necessary for institutional reforms, education, healthcare, and community transformation. For instance, Germany's reparations to Holocaust survivors funded the Jewish Museum Berlin and supported social integration projects while simultaneously making direct payments to survivors over time, which as of 2023 total over 80 billion euros. Similarly, reparations in Jamaica could finance initiatives like educational reforms, healthcare improvements, and infrastructure development that directly benefit historically marginalized communities as a result of slavery and colonialism, not accepted. By focusing on monetary compensation, we ensure that reparations are tangible and sustainable. With this in mind, Mr. Speaker, I advise the proposition to listen closely as we outline the how, because we have yet to hear how they will prioritize reconciliation. So the opposition is proud to present the Jamaica Universal Reparations Investment Scheme, what we're calling JURIS. And I understand that JURIS is Latin for of law or of right. And we're proud to be on the right side of the debate today. JURIS seeks to address the systemic economic harm caused by slavery and colonialism by investing reparations directly into Jamaica's core development areas, ensuring sustainable growth and economic independence. Mr. Speaker?
On that point?
Not accepted. The JURIS is a specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound investment policy proposal aimed at driving economic transformation over the next 17 years. The JURIS is smart, Mr. Speaker. 1.6 trillion Jamaican dollars would be invested in strategic sectors such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic diversification and innovation. In its first phase, we will negotiate reparations through the already established national and regional reparations committees not accepted and request a minimum of 1.6 trillion Jamaican dollars or 7.6 billion pounds. And this calculation is based on 0.1% of the Battle Report estimate, because, Madam Speaker, we understand that $7.6 trillion is twice the size of the GDP of the UK right now. So we have to be realistic and pragmatic about our approach. We propose investments across 15% to education and skills development to equip Jamaica's youth for the knowledge economy. 10% of this would go to healthcare and social equity to address disparities and improving healthcare outcomes. 35% of this to infrastructure development, transforming Jamaica's transportation networks and energy sector, creating jobs and tackling the housing deficit. And 25% to economic diversification and innovation, boosting innovation in manufacturing, technology, and agriculture, strengthening Jamaica's competitive edge. And Mr. Speaker, the economics say that this would raise our GDP by roughly 56.1% over the next decade and a half. It's not a short-term payout, it's an investment in Jamaica's future. Mr. Speaker, as I hurry along, I want to remind the proposition that on one thing we fundamentally agree. Reconciliation is important, but it is largely symbolic. It cannot replace material justice that prioritizing monetary compensation offers. While reconciliation efforts like apologies and truth-telling can help heal social relations, they do nothing to address the economic harm caused by slavery. Mr. Speaker, as I close, I hasten to reiterate that monetary compensation is logical, practical, and beneficial. Slavery and colonialism were economic systems, and monetary compensation alone can effectively address the deep financial harm they caused. We've heard the proposition argue for symbolic reconciliation and apologies, but should we continue pursuing an apology-based reconciliation that may never come? My third speaker will wrap up our contribution to this very vital discussion. Thank you.
All right, so we thank the second opposition speaker for an equally spirited contribution to the debate, and we will now engage in the final period of cross-examination, where once again we'll allow opposition to field questions to proposition and then flip the arrangement. So opposition.
Okay. So team proposition, wouldn't you agree that the prioritizing reconciliation over monetary compensation is a way to make victims emotionally responsible for fixing a system that they did not break?
No, and here's why. They don't think they did anything wrong. And it is your argument itself. If they can simply pay it out, they are not acknowledging that they did something wrong. What you have literally in society is they will continue to operate as if we are just some lower class people because we never actually addressed the mentality that led them to think we were cheap labor.
There's been over 7 occasions where different persons from the UK has expressed regret and stop short of an apology. What makes you think they will do so now, given the time that has passed since the crime?
First things first, when David Cameron, former British Prime Minister, came to Jamaica, he said, let us move on, and that is telling us, we regret, but he's not apologizing for the atrocities that happened during slavery. The mere fact that we have men going around raping young girls are legacies of slavery. The breakdown of families are legacy of slavery. We need them at the table to say that we are sorry for the things that we have done, and we are going to repair it. That is why the CARICOM 10-point plan starts with an apology and other reconciliatory activities.
And furthermore, they are not interested in monetary compensation because they don't think they did anything wrong. They agree with you. It was a business deal. You never like it. Move on.
All right. Now for the final question from side opposition.
Again, if they believe that they did not do anything wrong, why would they apologize given the legal implications of an apology in international law and private law?
Because reconciliation literally forces two parties to sit and discuss it. When they discuss it and recognize and accept that they have contributed to the ills of society, that is when they would be willing to apologize.
And there's no payment unless there is some acknowledgement of the wrong. We are saying start with the acknowledgement, then the payment will come. This is more logical sequence to the issue.
Precisely. Right now, they don't want to pay because they view it as a business deal that you didn't like. No business.
All right, thank you. Now we'll entertain the questions from side proposition.
If France, who took reparations from Haiti, can say reparations crippled the Haitian economy, why would it be more morally justifiable for us to cripple the economies? Does that make us any different from them?
It does make us different because we are addressing the harm that they did to us. Them saying that they would not provide it is hypocritical. If you can compensate the slave owners, you can compensate the enslaved.
By that response, can you clearly say to the people watching now that you can sum up slavery as purely economical? How does the money compensate for the psychological, social, emotional harms of slavery?
Because some of those psychological and social, because they're socioeconomic harms, were caused by the loss of our resources. And that is why pumping back the money in will ensure that I don't have to take 4 buses from St. Mary to get to Kingston, because they only develop the ports in Kingston to get the resources out of Jamaica.
The
Final question, go ahead.
The very extensive economic plan that you outlined just now is already present in the status quo by help from the very former oppressors. How then does your policy change the status quo?
Well, the policy that we presented would be different from what exists currently. There's currently no mechanism through which monetary compensation specifically for reparations would flow. So therefore, our position, our scheme is different than the aid that the UK gives us presently. It's different from the investments the UK makes in Jamaica presently. This is specifically for reparations and is based on accountability. Just like with a lawsuit, someone can pay over a settlement without admitting wrongdoing.
All right, so we thank both teams for another engaging period of cross-examinations. And at this point, the debate will pause for 1 minute to allow the reply speakers to put the finishing touches on their speeches, after which we will proceed with the submission from the opposition reply speaker and then from the proposition. That 1 minute begins now. All right, so that bell signals the end of that 1 minute. And now to conclude the case and side opposition, make welcome the opposition reply speaker. Here, here.
Honorable judges, worthy opponents, and esteemed audience. Today I stand here proud to be the third speaker for side opposition, a side that does not stand for pity or platitudes, but for payment first, payment which is long overdue. First, I must start by addressing the falsehoods and half-truths put to you by Team Proposition. Firstly, we asked them several times, if South Africa was so successful, why would the Afrikaners, and point of information for Team Proposition, the Afrikaners are the rich minority, so how would they be fleeing for economic reasons? They are the ones fleeing and claiming violence, racial violence. So if the problems were so well addressed, why are they leaving? Secondly, the proposition team stated that the U.S. offered compensation to the enslaved. However, this compensation was not widespread. As such, it cannot be counted as a failure when everyone that suffered, or the entirety of the black population, did not see something from it. Again, Mr. Speaker, slavery was economic first. Though they utilized cruel means, they were a means to an economic end. I continue. Mr. Speaker, the first and most critical point of this clash is how we understand slavery and colonialism. The proposition has tried to reduce these systems to just cultural and historical injustices. We agree that they are cultural and historic, but everything that has been suffered starts with the economic loss first. We have proven that these systems are economic machines, designed and sustained to extract wealth, labor, and resources from Caribbean colonies for the benefit of our former colonial powers. We share the words of scholar Walter Rodney, who emphasized that the exploitation of African labor was an economic strategy first, with racism serving as the justification and not the cause. To this we say, since the injury was overwhelmingly economic, then reparation must be economic too. And yes, Mr. Speaker, the economic harm caused by this system persists today, and they are alive and unwell. Yes, alive and unwell. Our poorly diversified economy, alive and unwell. Our exchange rate of £1 to 208 Jamaican dollars, alive and unwell. The existence of communities without running water and access to safe and reliable public transportation because all they did was build the ports, alive and unwell. So, Mr. Speaker, we will continue, and I will continue by addressing the misconception that compensation requires admission of guilt. The very UN principles that guide the CARICOM Reconciliation Commission states that the right to remedy and reparation can and must happen even in the absence of an apology. And the very CARICOM Commission agreed, even if an apology is not obtained, we must push forward to getting monetary compensation. If we push forward past an apology, that tells me what must be prioritized. Mr. Speaker, symbolism does not build hospitals, it does not diversify economies, and it certainly does not reverse decades of accumulated poverty and underdevelopment. Yes, reconciliation plays a role in the repatriation, in reparation, but without prioritization of monetary compensation, reconciliation is hollow. They want us to wait for apologies, for truth commissions. But as we've shown with the examples of Canada and South Africa, these gestures do not change material realities. There has been dauntless reconciliation efforts in Canada. Indigenous communities still lack clean water today. And in South Africa, the wealth gap between the white and black South Africans are still gapping. Rwanda has failed, Zimbabwe has failed, because the root cause of the hurt was not addressed. And in our case, the root cause and the reason for this hurt was economic. To summarize, Mr. Speaker, our arguments are logical, practical, and beneficial. Our policy is smart. We are not binded by the pains and harms caused by these systems. Instead, we use this pain to guide us in the pursuit for material justice for the Caribbean people. So on behalf of the developing nations who started the development race behind the start line because of these systems, we say justice is delayed when we prioritize reconciliation efforts such as truth commissions and apologies that may never come. And justice delayed is justice denied. We rest.
Right, so we thank the opposition reply speaker for a fiery closing to their side of the House, and now to close out the debate in totality, we make welcome the proposition reply speaker. Hear, hear.
The very fact that the opposition can characterize our opposition leader as a white man gives precedence to the argument that we need reconciliation, we need to heal from the process and the ills of slavery. We are here to debate this motion, and we want you to understand that, firstly, the slavery abolition can arguably be seen as one of the biggest wins for the victims of colonization and slavery. Apart from the legal end of chattel slavery, it also shifted the moral discourse and catalyzed the resistance, the change to resistance and the renewal of identity for our people. So the key issue is, what does justice look like? It's not just what does justice cost. So we are saying it should be policy and principle over payments. So who is affected and why are we having this debate? We are trying to bridge the gap between beneficiaries, former colonies, and also those who are morally culpable. We want meaningful restitution. Now, before I jump into the major clashes, I want us to look at the fact that the opposition came to us and they said economic aids, and we want you to understand that what they presented as economic aids and benefits as a part of monetary compensation already exists through international aid. So what they are proposing is that there will be no change to the status quo except for a pause and a backlog due to the recalculation and all of that things and the processes that need to follow for their monetary compensation to occur. So aid is eternal as we have it now, but they are saying monetary compensation should disrupt that, and monetary compensation is fleeting. They say pay over a settlement, it can be done without acknowledgement. When we do this, what we are saying is that there should be money at all costs, even the cost of our dignity. So we want to look at the characterization of this debate, the practicality, and the impact of this debate. Now, the characterization. This clash frames the entire debate on the kind of justice that was committed, and injustice rather, and determines if the reconciliation versus reparation is morally and practically appropriate. They said everything about slavery was economic. It's an economic system. We want you to understand it was far more than that, because the worst white man, the poorest white man, was better than every black man. That is not economic. So what we want you to see is that they also subscribe to the idea that justice must be tangible. So if we focus only on what is tangible, then away with the courts that seek justice, away with the courts that seek counseling, away with every form of justice system that seeks to restore rather than to calculate and compensate. So we gave you on this issue that the harm caused by slavery and colonization was primarily moral. It dehumanized, erased cultures, fractured human dignity. Therefore, reparative process must begin with reconciliation, which is best addresses the identity, memory, and historical truths. All of these are invaluable. We win on this clash because we rightly center the solution on rehumanizing the oppressed, restoring historical truth, and healing identity. When monetary compensation supersedes moral acknowledgement, a band-aid is being placed on a deeply scarring wound. We must address the harm for what it is. Our stance more adequately addresses this harm. So, secondly, we see where we look at the practicality of the issues that were discussed. When we look at the practicality, we get from side opposition that there's no big deal. What is another loan for the UK? But UK has firmly said we will not pay. Another loan is another disruption in all of the economic good that we benefit from them. Accountability without apology, that's what we get from their side. We are saying, and they also tell us that we should prioritize, but we are saying we have already prioritized the better part of this process, the healing process, because we have said start a conversation, activate the healing process. So when we look at it from our side, you get relational justice, truth commissions, public apologies, and the works. And we are winning on this clash because the opposition focuses on correcting the past economically, but we focus on transformation by prioritizing a change of systems and social narratives. We give you the example of Rwanda and South Africa that have done well in this regard. And thirdly, we look at the impact on society. We win on this clash because we give you monetary reparations and without the backlash of all of these things. And we give you the CARICOM 10-point plan that starts with reconciliation, and the 10th point in that 10-point plan is monetary compensation. So proposition is sound in recognizing that the harms that we get from this cannot be ignored, and for the practical good of humanity, we must address it for what it is. We are saying it's like apologizing to a child that you have harmed builds trust, but throwing money at them tells them that there's compensation for their pain, and they're paying as a price. So based on what was presented, we are saying that we acknowledge the harm For what it is significantly moral and psychological. We prioritize restorative relational acts, and we bridge the gap between the beneficiaries and the morally culpable. True reparations are not checks, they are commitments. Policy must be led by principle. We must prioritize reconciliation, and we are not saying that money doesn't matter, but even money can perpetuate injustice. Let us start with, not with payments, but with truth, dignity, and transformation. Thank you.
So we thank the proposition reply speaker for closing out the debate in totality.
Right, let's have a round of applause for the teams. And just to point out that this is a safe space for debating. The views don't necessarily align with the individual's perspective, but in the interest of arguing for and against, we have to put forward your best arguments. That said, we had a very spirited match between Teaching Service, the proponent, and Ministry of Tourism, the opponent, and they debated the moot. Be it resolved that reparations for slavery and colonialism should prioritize reconciliation over monetary compensation. For those of you on social media, what are your views? Are you for or against the moot? Well, the judges have the task now of deliberating, and they will come back to advise us of the winners and the best speaker. Stay tuned for those of you online. Those of you in the room, you may go and have a break whilst the judges deliberate. Thank you so much for watching. Well done, teams.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We witnessed a truly spirited and engaging debate on whether to prioritize reconciliation over monetary compensation for slavery and colonialism. So as a panel of adjudicators, the arduous task was ours to wade through the arguments and, of course, the noise, to weigh the actual arguments and the substantive content that was presented in today's match. Quick reminder, in proposition, we had teaching service, and in opposition, we had Ministry of Tourism. And again, the motion was, be it resolved, just find it quickly. Be it resolved that reparations for slavery and colonialism should prioritize reconciliation over monetary compensation. So after listening to the arguments, as a panel of adjudicators, we were left with certain questions. First question was, how will either model affect the perceptions of the average citizen? That was the first question. What does the harms or the hurts look like? Proposition, we got your characterization of what obtains and what happens in status quo. We thought, though, even though you took a very principled position, it would have been more beneficial to show us practical examples of the harm, right? And tell us how it affects people in today's society, in status quo. On side opposition, we got a sort of argumentation that, listen, whether or not these people apologize, the impacts of slavery are still far-reaching and still exists in today's society. And we got this example of what happens with the Port of Kingston and how that significantly disproportions rural communities in comparison to Kingston in terms of transportation, because transportation is more affordable to residents in Kingston because, again, this need for Kingston to have been developed so that goods could be moved in and out of Kingston, right, where ports are concerned, as opposed to other rural communities that were not developed in those significant kind of ways. So that is one of the tangible manifestations of the harms that opposition would have claimed, and it would have been useful for us to get a similar characterization on your side of the house. Another, so we saw these harms more definitively when they talk about things like poor infrastructure like roads, and how in the instances that we do get financial reparations, they will benefit not just infrastructure, but also benefit us in terms of agriculture and other social programs, right? So ultimately, we get that on side opposition, they're saying we are not the potentials or the benefits that you put forward in their world. So that is basically what they said. On the matter of international aid, right? Because international aid was one of the arguments that came up in the debate. You guys said, in their world, it is not necessary, basically, for us to seek after this sort of reparation because we get some form of benefits through international aid. And as a panel of adjudicators, we thought that international aid is not the same as reparations. So the benefits that you posit we currently get in status quo through international aid would still exist and be even bolstered by what we would get through reparations as posited in their world. Right. We also got a sort of argumentation on what exactly is the cost of slavery and what does justice look like. On side proposition, we hear that we cannot put a price on the cost of slavery because slavery was dehumanizing and it was demoralizing and people lost their identities. And the best way that we solve that is through having that sort of conversation that facilitates the perpetrators of slavery and colonialism to come into an understanding of the harms that they perpetrated or the harms that they inflicted on the persons that experience slavery. But on side opposition now, we get, okay, so even if we do get that sort of understanding and they do understand what they do, it still does not significantly help or does anything for the citizens because the injustices and the effects of slavery, in as much as we do not prioritize this monetary compensation, it largely remains unchanged and the reality of the citizens does not improve, hence they are not left in a better position. And we as a panel of adjudicators thought that that was a very compelling argument. So, at the end of our deliberations, the match ended with proposition on 273 points and opposition on 276 points. That means team opposition won. However, However, we thought that the best speaker did come from the losing team in this match, and it would have been Mr. Roshane Nelson of Teaching Service. Thank you, teams, for joining us. I'll invite Paula Shea to come and close us out.
Well, this brings a very exciting afternoon to an end. I'm sure you all enjoyed the debate. I can tell from the discourse that we all enjoyed the debate. So kudos to both teams. And for those of you who are online, this may not be the end of the road for team proposition, as look forward to our announcement for the top 16 teams who will be going through to the next round. So, thank you for joining us, and continue to watch our pages, TIU Jamaica, for all updates and to see which of your favorites will be proceeding to our round of 16.